I'm very honored to have this opportunity to share with you and to have a lot of the religious leaders from Kenya on this call. The title of this webinar is Exposing the Comprehensive Sexuality Education Agenda in Kenya. So with no further ado, we will start. And just a brief introduction to Family Watch, in case you're not familiar with us. We work to protect the family as the fundamental unit of society. And we have something that's called consultative status at the United Nations. That means we have the opportunity to go in and work with governments and to influence the debates and the negotiated documents that happen there. And we are a consultant to a number of UN member states, including members of the African Voting Bloc. And we have also held UN family policy forums at an annual basis. And Kenya has been sending their representatives to our forums for training and briefings for a number of years. So we're going to talk about the attack on the family that is being perpetuated by Western governments and UN agencies, but we're mainly going to cover three main points. What is comprehensive sexuality education, also known as CSE? Who is behind the CSE agenda in Africa? What Kenya can do to protect your children from CSE? So we'll start with what is comprehensive sexuality education. It is one of the greatest assaults on the world's children that we have ever known. And we'll show you how it is the #1 tool of the global sexual rights agenda. To understand what comprehensive sexuality education is, we need to understand what is sexuality and what would be comprehensively taught about sexuality. We need look no further than the World Health Organization for the definition that is used by governments and UN agencies, which says sexuality encompasses such things as gender identities, pleasure, desires, fantasies, behaviors, eroticisms, and sexual orientation. So if you're going to be taught comprehensively about all those things, you can imagine what the content might be in some of these programs. And the World Health Organization, along with many other UN agencies and UNESCO, came out with this international technical guidance on sexuality education. And this is supposed to inform the whole world on what should be taught to children about sexuality. Notice all of these logos. This has the firepower of all these multi-million-dollar UN agencies. And as I mentioned, the World Health Organization, which sets the health standards for the world. So it has a new definition for abstinence. Abstinence doesn't just mean choosing not to have sex. It also means deciding when to start having sex with whom. Children are to be taught that their decision to be sexually active should be respected at all times. That adolescent girls generally are less knowledgeable about their rights concerning abortion. Children are asked to differentiate between values that they hold and that their parents and their guardians hold about sexuality. They're supposed to learn to summarize the key elements of sexual pleasure and responsibility, to define gender and biological sex and describe how they are different, which could bring in the transgender agenda, to question social and cultural norms that impact sexual behavior, and to differentiate between the values that they hold and their parents hold about sexuality. Now here's where we learn what is the real goal behind sexuality education according to these UN agencies. It's demand creation. The demand creation potential of CSE, they're working to create customers of children for their youth-friendly SRH services and commodities. And we'll learn what that means as we go along. Now, these are things that all these UN agencies believe should be taught to children through comprehensive sexuality education programs. So who's behind all of this? I would like to point to the main instigator of these harmful agendas for children, International Planned Parenthood Federation, also known as IPPF. This is from their website. Comprehensive sexuality education is in the middle. And some of the main components they put here is diversity. They're talking about diversity in gender and sexual orientation, pleasure, sexual rights. And here is from their Exclaim publication. They say, young people are entitled to sexual pleasure, and information on how to experience different forms of sexual pleasure is important for their health and well-being. Their publication, Putting Sexuality Back into Comprehensive Sexuality Education, states, IPPF includes pleasure as an essential component of CSE, but this can be tricky, subject to address in conservative or religious settings. In other words, they're saying that faith leaders and churches are the obstacle to implementing CSE. Now, this US publication from the Planned Parenthood affiliate, it's for 10 and up, as you can see in the corner, really illustrates their philosophy that all sex acts are perfectly normal for children. Here are some of the illustrations of children engaged in various sexual activities. And this is unconscionable. This is IPPF's Young Person's Guide to Rights, Sexuality, and Living with HIV, Healthy, Happy, and Hot. This is for HIV-infected children. It tells them they have a right to sexual pleasure. They can do it licking, tickling, sucking, cuddling. They can just have fun with sex and explore themselves. And it tells youth that laws that say that people living with HIV must tell their sexual partners that they're infected with the HIV virus, these violate the rights of people. Now, this is promoting sexual rights at the expense of sexual health. And IPPF has 65,000 service points in 170 countries. Now, here's their philosophy with regard to adolescents on sex positivity. CSE holds that adolescents are autonomous sexual beings and that they have the right to control their agency and to have pleasure. So this is giving children sexual rights, the right to sex in any way at any time. Sex positive children are sexual beings. Every human is, regardless of their age, even at the youngest ages, according to IPPF. And if you notice, this is for children under 10 in this publication by IPPF that tells them to explore their sexualities by themselves or with a sexual or romantic partner at 10 years old. That this can feel great if they touch their genitals. Having sex is a great way to express a person's feelings. They can do it through touching, kissing, caressing, etc. Now, I had a hard time even believing this myself when I read this for the first time. For children under 10, they want them to know that sexual activity can include commercial sex work or prostitution. Now, this brings us to, where did Planned Parenthood come from? You've noticed the logo in the corner that says RFSU. It says that the International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, was founded by RFSU and other actors. RFSU was founded in 1993, and their goal is to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights, SRHR. CSE is the #1 tool to advance SRHR. We'll learn a little bit about RFSU. Did you know that RFSU is the Planned Parenthood affiliate, and not only helped to found Planned Parenthood, but they remain an affiliate of Planned Parenthood. And RFSU is the Swedish Association for Sexuality Education, and they partner with the Swedish government, which is called Sweden's Development Agency, or SIDA. And their goals are stated here on their website. They promote legal and safe abortion in sub-Saharan Africa, and their fund works for LGBT rights and sexual education. And this shows that they allocated 23 million to these efforts. Here's Mrs. Bakova of Sweden announcing with UNESCO a big joint project. This is with the Regional Office for Southern Africa. It's called Our Rights, Our Lives, Our Future. Now, this shows us on the RFSU website that one of RFSU's main issues is the right to free abortion. And here's one of their older publications that tells us that SRHR, that's Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, is about a right to express sexuality and to decide freely whom you want to have sex with, irrespective of age. So that means children have this right. Here's one of their publications for teens, Sex Your Own Way. And as you can see, They have very graphic pictures of children engaged in various sex acts and teach them about these things. Sex positions is something you can learn through this book and from each other. Now, what is their motive? Why are they sexualizing children? Because Planned Parenthood and all their affiliates financially benefit when children are sexually active, because then they're going to need condoms, abortions, hormones, contraceptives, CSE programs to counsel them about how to have so-called safe sex and sexual counseling. So where does RFSU's funding come from? Well, various sources, including their company, RFSU Ltd. And where do they get their money? Selling condoms, lubricants, sex toys, and pregnancy tests. In fact, they have a whole range of sex toys, including a line called Trust in Lust. And here's their Masturbation, a Hands-On Guide publication. So this takes us to the CSE agenda, specifically in Africa. Member from Sweden, they launched with UNESCO. You can see UNESCO's logo in the upper left-hand corner of this publication. Our rights, our lives, our future. And their goal is to provide access to comprehensive sexuality education for all adolescents. And they define adolescence as beginning at 10 years old. And this is how they're going to link them to sexual and reproductive health services across sub-Saharan Africa. And here are their focus countries, and you can see Kenya is one of their focus countries. Now here's an interesting note. RFSU's union chairman, Hans Lind, he received a prize from the United Nations. It was his leadership and commitment to achieving rights and choices for all. This was presented at the Nairobi conference last November, the Nairobi Summit. And notice that IPPF's partners include UNFPA and the World Health Organization. So IPPF was heavily involved in the Nairobi Summit in Nairobi. So if you look at the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education that we explored earlier, you'll notice that one of the contributors to this guidance was also named Hans Olsen, and he was also with RFSU, and that RFSU has cooperated with UNESCO since 2009, and that they helped develop this international technical guidance on sexuality education, which should be no surprise when we see the content. And RFSU was appointed by UNESCO as an official collaborative organization with high status with UNESCO. Now, let's get into IPPF's strategic plans from 2016 to 2022. Their priority objective number 5 is to advance safe abortion, which is their deceptive term for advancing abortion generally. And they want to expand access to, and the quality of comprehensive sexuality education around the world. So they run popular campaigns to mobilize those who support sexual and reproductive health and rights. So their IPPF African regional offices are now headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya. So everything that's happening in Africa is emanating from this office in Kenya. And this is what they say about the African region, that IPPF in the African region is the leading sexual and reproductive health SRH service delivery organization in Africa. They have a lot of clients, a lot of customers sexualizing children. And here they boldly say, achieving sexual and reproductive health and rights, it's a human rights obligation for Africa, so says IPPF. In fact, they've even manipulated the African Union. I believe someone told me their offices are actually inside the African Union, and they even got the African First Ladies to advocate for women's sexual reproductive health rights, and I believe many of them did not understand the deceptive agenda they were promoting. Now this is IPPF's affiliate organization right in Kenya. It's called Family Health Options Kenya. It was Kenya's first ever family planning clinic. Now look at all the logos on their website, and you can Google this yourself. These are some of the organizations that are funding Planned Parenthood's affiliate in Kenya, Family Health Options Kenya. You've got Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, UNFPA, SIDA, that's the Swedish International Development Agency, IPPF, RFSU, and many others. Now, they say in Kenya, one of their goals is tackling abortion stigma. They want to normalize it and make everybody think it's a good thing. And they're awarding small grants to young people to create projects that tackle abortion stigma. Now we're going to take a little bit of a turn to UNFPA and show how they've been promoting the comprehensive sexuality education and a specific adolescent agenda. And that brings us to the Nairobi Summit held last November, which many of you were aware of. And we're very grateful to the religious leaders that signed a joint statement calling out the Nairobi Summit and the organizers for advancing controversial and harmful SRHR and CSE agendas. So if you go to the UNFPA website, they have these so-called key facts. And these are facts that we hear everywhere about comprehensive sexuality education. Comprehensive sexuality education does not lead to earlier sexual activity or riskier sexual behavior. In fact, these programs reduce risky behaviors. And studies of abstinence-only programs are either inconclusive or show abstinence-only education is ineffective. So they produce these lies and disseminate them and make governments feel like they're hurting their children if they don't provide them with CSE. Here's something else that they say. Studies show that when young people are empowered with basic information about their bodies and reproductive health, they make responsible choices. So they make it seem like CSE is just going to give them basic information about their bodies and that this is going to help them delay sexual activity or use protection if they're sexually active. And they say when delivered according to the international standards, and we saw what those look like, this can promote gender equality and respectful relationships. Now, who wouldn't want this? They make it sound so wonderful and so helpful to your country, to your youth, to your families. But they even warned that young people who are denied this information, they might even die. It might even be fatal if they don't get comprehensive sexuality education. But what's the truth? We actually commissioned a study of an institute called the Institute for Research and Evaluation, which is independent. And we asked them to look at all the studies that UNESCO and UNFPA and all the UN agencies cite to, and IPPF to say that comprehensive sexuality education does all these wonderful things and abstinence education doesn't work. Well, what did they find? Looking at the same studies and giving an unbiased review, that 87% of the CSE programs failed worldwide, and the African countries at 89%. And many of the CSE programs actually increased sexual risk-taking. 24% of the CSE programs increased sexual risk-taking. So you can see that that's a bunch of lies. And you can find this report online. You can go to sexedreport.org. Using the criteria from the field of prevention research, they found no evidence that school-based CSE prevents teen pregnancy or STDs, no evidence that it increases abstinence, and too many CSE programs increased sexual risk-taking. So back to UNFPA, even though they're making all these false claims. Now listen to this theme: my body, my life, my world. This is for youth. This is what they launched at the Nairobi Summit. And it sounds great, making informed choices over their own bodies. But what does that really mean? UNFPA has a vision where a world where every young person can make their choices and enjoy their rights. What choices? What rights? Well, if you look at the top of this part of the publication, it says the rights imperative. And what is part of that? Affirming sexual orientation and gender identity, and then giving the right to decide when and with whom to have sex. This is for adolescents. They want them to have access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. And they say, we support access to comprehensive sexuality education for all children. And what comprehensive sexuality education programs are they talking about? Well, access to comprehensive sexuality education that has to have respect for adolescents' agency and autonomy. This is a direct assault on the rights of parents, which are enshrined in multiple international binding treaties. This is their model. It's the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education. And that's the publication we already learned about with all of its problems. Then they have the Safeguard Youth Program, SYP, for Africa. And as part of that program, if you look at the bottom of this slide, They have a phone app called Tune Me that youth can get to, and they've reached over 4.39 million young people, mostly in Africa. Here's their phone app called Tune Me, where you can learn about sex, your body, hot topics, tips. You can learn things like, do you want to do it? How do you ask for consent? Children are taught to ask, do you like it when I do this? Is it okay if I take your shirt off, your top, your bra, your pants? I really feel like having sex with you. Do you feel like it too? What is oral sex? And an in-depth description on what oral sex is. Masturbation, it's to feel pleasure. It's not harmful. It's natural and normal. And this is just unbelievable. Ending a pregnancy. There are two types of terminations. You simply just empty the contents of the uterus, or you remove the contents of the uterus, and it gives children a helpline to call so that they can just empty their uterus, otherwise known as abortion. Do you think you could be gay? It's not uncommon for young people to explore their sexuality with someone of the same sex. And then UNFPA launched for the ICPD 25 Nairobi Summit their Youth Engagement Toolkit. And it says, a key issue of ICPD, the International Conference on Population Development, is comprehensive sexuality education that will allow you to decide if and when and with whom you want to have sex. Access to safe abortion care. You have safe options other than pregnancy, they tell the youth. LGBTI and human sexuality. It's at the core of achieving the ICPD program of action. How do these issues affect you? Well, you have LGBTI and human sexuality a right to decide what your body and sex characteristics look like. Now, what does that mean? That means you have a right to surgery and hormones to change the appearance of your body to an alternative sex, to express your authentic, non-gendered self, and to love who you wish to love. Again, this is UNFPA. This is what they were teaching in Nairobi and that they're spreading across the world. In fact, they work with young people. They've empowered more than 6,000 young people in their sexual and reproductive health and rights. And they have this extensive Y Peer program. They're training youth to bring these concepts and comprehensive sexuality education to other youth throughout your country. They have a training manual for the trainers for Y Peer. It says it's spearheaded by UNFPA in partnership with UNICEF, the agency charged with protecting children. Here's an example of a role play they want children to be involved in. You are about to engage in a sexual encounter. Show your partner how to use the condom correctly while not spoiling the moment. Or they manipulate the children's values. They ask them to explore their values. Just stand on an imaginary line somewhere between agree and disagree while the peer reads these statements. All young people should remain virgins until they're married. I would accept a friend who is homosexual. Prostitution should be banned. And by having them stand on whether they agree or disagree or in between, they start conversations and start to indoctrinate them and normalize these kinds of behaviors. In fact, they have an activity called privacy squares. With whom would you share your sexual experiences, your sexual fantasies, what kind of erotic materials you enjoy? Have you fantasized about a homosexual relationship? Or what are your feelings about oral sex? This is what they're asking children to share with each other. And they want children to be more comfortable talking openly about sexuality. So they give them large index cards and they put words on there, such as clitoris, penis, and other words related to sexuality to desensitize them to these things. So we've already answered this question to a great degree. Who is behind the CSE agenda in Africa? But I'm going to give you more specifics in Kenya. But I'll start with the regional program launched by UNESCO, UNFPA, and Advocates for Youth. This was launched in South Africa, where they did a training for teachers from all the different countries that had signed an agreement to promote CSE that we'll talk about in a minute. But let's look at the logo at the bottom, Advocates for Youth. Who are they? Well, they are an aggressive youth SRHR CSE organization that really is a puppet of Planned Parenthood. Now notice their motto, it's our bodies, our lives, our movement, very similar to the theme that was for the Nairobi Summit for children regarding bodies and lives and rights. In fact, Advocates for Youth probably wrote this publication that's being used in Africa. Here they feature it on their website as one of their accomplishments. And we analyzed this program and it scored 15 out of 15 for the common harmful CSE elements that we identify in CSE programs. Here's just a few of the elements. This circle of sexuality is used in lots of different CSE programs where they learn about the human sexual response cycle. That's about orgasm, fantasy, gender identity, sexual orientation. Can you believe this? This is the training for teachers in Africa. Here's some of the excerpts. If you're able to explore same-sex relationships, it could be a great teaching opportunity to normalize relationships between gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. This is a main goal of CSE programs. Confusing children about their gender in Africa, telling them gender identity is knowing whether one is male, female, neither, or somewhere in between, as if that was even possible. Or they put children into these role plays. Sydney and Grace are alone at one of their houses, feeling uninhibited. She takes the initiative and performs oral sex. Many children aren't even aware about what that is. And it undermines traditional values and beliefs. It actually says it's important to change social norms and harmful practices that are not in line with human rights. Well, whose version of human rights? That's IPPF's. In fact, this program, this African program, actually refers youth to Planned Parenthood clinics for their confidential services. That means confidential from the parents, so that they can get counseling about abortion and abortion services. Now, this is a common activity used in many CSE programs across the world. It tells children, how do I decide if I'm going to have sex? Nothing about waiting till marriage. It's just, how do I decide? Well, if you feel close to the person, if you feel like you've made the decision together, if you're comfortable talking about condom use, if you're sexually attracted to the person, these are the principles that you need to decide upon as your basis for deciding whether you're going to have sex. And finally, we've got the Guttmacher Institute, which used to be the research arm of Planned Parenthood until they spun it off. And UN agencies rely on a lot of their information. And they did a big paper in 2017 on sexuality education policies in Kenya. And here they say, comprehensive sexuality education programs seek to teach adolescents to exercise what? Their sexual and reproductive rights safely and responsibly by recognizing that sexual activity at their age is normative. I'll just repeat that. By recognizing that sexual activity at their age is normative. CSE is intended to normalize sexual activity for adolescents. And they complain that fear-based orientation in the teaching and the consistent negative light cast on adolescent sexuality are barriers to CSE. So we need to accept adolescent sexuality and sexual activity and celebrate it so that we can have the full program of comprehensive sexuality education. And they started identifying barriers to CSE. And one of the main barriers was opposition from religious and conservative groups. Thank goodness you are standing and speaking up. Now, this one you need to really pay attention to. It's called the SRHR Alliance Kenya, Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Alliance. Here's their website, sounds so nice, working together to increase access to reproductive health and rights. That's their priorities. Well, if you dig more in their website and you know what to look for, I found this for one of their projects. Their goal was to increase demand and access to quality sexual and reproductive health services, to increase the quality and delivery of comprehensive sexuality education. Toward what end? It's all towards to increase acceptance of sexual diversity and gender identity, meaning transgender identities. So, comprehensive sexuality education programs from this SRHR Alliance is targeting adolescents and young people in Kenya starting at 10 years old. And through these programs, they use these nice sounding words to describe it, probably to your government, to the public, to the schools. They say it's going to be age appropriate, medically accurate information on topics related to sexuality, including human development, relationships, decision-making, abstinence, and contraception and disease prevention. Sounds so nice. Well, let's look at what program they say does that. Let's start with The World Starts With Me. This program was implemented in Kenya. It was funded by the government of the Netherlands through the Planned Parenthood affiliate, Rutgers. again, funded by the Netherlands government. It's called Rutgers for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, and they're implementing The World Starts With Me in Kenya, which has the same similar definition to sexuality as the World Health Organization, but they go a little bit more in detail. They talk about vaginal or anal sex, petting and masturbation don't have to affect your virginity. And it's up to the youth. The choice is theirs if they want to lose their virginity. French kissing, oral sex, masturbation. They even have these activities where they have these different girls and boys that are naked and they have to identify the differences in their private parts. Okay, that's in Kenya. They also have something called the Center for the Study of Adolescence in Kenya, which is addressing the needs of adolescents in Kenya. And guess who conducted the training? Rutgers, the Dutch-based organization funded by the Netherlands government. And this again reveals their true goal. The sensitive areas that affect young people, which can be handled boldly by this Center for Study of Adolescence, are what? Sexual diversity, abortion, masturbation, premarital sex, and pornography. This is all right on their website, but they're very, very strategic, and they have studies and research on how to change your society, how to change your gender, sexual, and cultural norms. And this is right there on their website. You can find it today. The Amplify Change, which is one of their projects, Amplify Change, the theory of change. How are they going to change your society? Well, if you start with the blue boxes here, first you're going to train individuals to demand their SRHR as human rights. You're going to have to give them access to SRHR resources, information, and services, which will help transform the social norms and make them advocates to change the policies and laws of Kenya. Now, those all go up to the yellow line here. The first one is establish that access to SRHR services are rights-based, and they're going to be culturally appropriate and gender sensitive. That's what they say, but the opposite is true. And that's because their end goals are access to safe and legal abortion, access to comprehensive sexuality education, and to eliminate stigma regarding gender. That means the gender identities. And all of those all go up to what end? Universal fulfillment of sexual reproductive health and rights. That's their utopian world. And they have on their website this report that they, I'm sure, instigated behind the scenes or openly with the government of Kenya. They use the line that we have to stop unsafe abortion. Women are always doing these unsafe abortions, so we have to provide safe abortions so that they don't get hurt. Very deceptive and very effective in advancing abortion. They also pay different journalists to write articles in your publications to sensitize the public. Here's one called Kenya Dilly-Dallies on Sex Education as Other Countries Reap the Benefits. And they usually have all the same lies in these different articles that you will see in your newspapers about how CSE is needed and kids are going to die of sexually transmitted diseases and children are going to get pregnant and they're going to have to drop out of school. And CSE is the antidote to all the world problems, every problem for the youth. But then the opposite is true. It actually sexualizes them. Okay, now this is one of the main targets of this webinar. You may have heard of this. It's the Eastern Southern African Ministerial Commitment. It was affirmed in December of 2013 in Cape Town. And if you notice in the background, all the UN agencies that I have circled, and they have this program now, it's called Young People Today, Time to Act Now, that is monitoring and pressuring governments to fulfill this commitment about comprehensive sexuality education. Again, you can go to this website where the UN is pushing and monitoring these 20 countries. The commitment starts with we, the ministers of education and health from 20 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, gathered in Cape Town, South Africa on this day. We're working toward a vision of young Africans who are global citizens, educated, healthy, resilient, social, all this wonderful stuff that I'm sure sounded very nice to your ministers at the time. These are the countries that signed on to this commitment. Kenya is right there. And I cannot tell you how many publications I've seen where the UN agencies and IPPF point to this commitment and say, you must implement comprehensive sexuality education because your ministers all agreed to increase the number of schools and teacher training institutions that provide CSE in your countries, in Kenya, to 75%. UNICEF is pushing this, UNFPA, UNAIDS, UNESCO, the World Health Organization, and we are working with a number of countries to try to get them to withdraw. And it is our main goal with this webinar that this can be one of the action items. Here is the minister from Sweden saying, evidence reveals that CSE in or out of schools does not increase sexual activity, sexual risk-taking behavior, or STI, HIV infection rates. All of this is not true, but that's why your government signed on. So as we get towards the end of this presentation, what we're seeing right now is wrong being put for right and right being put for wrong. We're living in a very confusing world, but I want to give you some good news. I did drag you through a lot of bad news, but if we're going to stop it, we need to know everything about it. And it's the children that we're after protecting, because the children are the future families of the world. So if we're going to protect the Kenyan family, we've got to protect the children and their futures. Good news is that the UN African voting bloc is against CSE and has stopped it many times in UN documents. There is big pushback. In fact, there was even a reservation on the UN Sustainable Development Goals from the African voting bloc saying they don't want CSE as part of those goals, but the UN agencies pretend like it's there anyways. Also, we have the White House under the Trump administration. They're now against CSE, so we're winning the policy battles when these UN documents are constantly being negotiated at the UN. We're usually able to get references to CSE out of them, but that doesn't mean that the UN entities or Planned Parenthood affiliates are not still pushing them on the ground. So here's the action items. What can Kenya do? What do you need to do to protect your children from this awful, harmful agenda? Well, we can take the example, this is in Mexico. Families are rising up around the world over this, saying, don't mess with our children. We are the ones that teach our children about these things. And we have a documentary, and we captured a protest in Kenya, where we have a number of people in Kenya that understand this agenda, that are fighting against it and saying no to CSE, and we're grateful to them. These are people in some other countries. We have those who are in South Africa. They did a march against the South African government with the plans to roll out CSE. That's heating up right now. They're trying to stop the sexual orientation and gender identity. You even had the president of Ghana speak out when their faith leader said, whoa, we can't have this CSE that conflicts with our religious and cultural values. And he had to quell the uprising. He said, as the president of the Republic of Ghana, I will not sit and allow material to be introduced to the kids that are bad. I'm a Christian. So be rest assured that as long as I remain the president, it will not happen. We need to get that kind of commitment from religious leaders across Africa. And here's an example of the Ghana bishops who spoke out and were able to stop the rollout of comprehensive sexuality education there. And they rightly identified that it was being used to promote homosexuality. And again, this is the tool that you have. We strongly encourage you to go to sexedreport.org and use this study with your government, with any schools that are trying to implement CSE, and show them that it's not going to work. It's going to make the children worse off, not better. So we would ask that we could all work together to withdraw Kenya from the Eastern Southern African CSE commitment, remove CSE from Kenya's schools, get UN agencies and IPPF and foreign governments out of your nation's sex education. Those are the 3 action items for our suggested Kenya Child Protection Plan. And we have a few tools for you that you can use. This was used successfully, this documentary, in Ghana. There's a 10-minute version, there's a 30-minute version, and it was actually also used in Uganda, and they passed a law against comprehensive sexuality education after the parliamentarians watched this. We would invite you to show this to your congregations. You can download it online, and it just goes through a lot of the agendas that I showed you and helps people understand the dangers of CSE. It's called The War on Children. We're also going to send all of you an electronic copy of our Family Defense Handbook, Stand for the Family, that has lots of good information that you can use as well. And we want you to join our coalition if you haven't already. It's called the Protect Kenya Children Coalition. We need to get this up to 10,000 as quickly as possible. We have, as a couple days ago, we had 1,874 signatures, but we need to call upon your government and the UN agencies and all these entities to stop pushing comprehensive sexuality education. And in fact, I looked and I saw that there was a petition a couple years ago on the SRHR Alliance petition for Kenya, and they only had like 750 signatures, and that's been up there for 3 years. We really are the majority The majority of people in the world, the majority, you know, of people in Kenya are against these things. So it's a matter of raising awareness. And if you send people the link to this website at stopcsc.org/Kenya, there'll be links on the right-hand side of the screen with links to the War on Children. We'll be putting up this webinar and other documentaries that will help you inform others about this fight. So in conclusion, I know we can do this, that together we can protect Kenya's children. And toward that end, you can sign the petition at stopcsc.org/Kenya, or you can watch this webinar at familywatch.org/webinars. So it'll take us a couple days to get this up. We hope you show this webinar to others and spread the word so that we can grow this large movement in Kenya to protect Kenya's children. Thank you.